Tonight, our legal panel here to discuss and debate President Obama's controversial decision to commute the sentence of Chelsea Manning. Then more confirmation hearings for Trump nominees, and that is raising a host of questions about the incoming Trump administration. Then, President Obama's last news conference, Donald Trump, the future of Obamacare, and so much more. Evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thank you so much for joining us on what is once again a very busy news day. Well, Trump's inauguration, it's just 2 days from now, and preparations continuing down in D.C. as hundreds of thousands of people are expected to converge on the Capitol. We, of course, will be covering it all starting at 10:30 in the morning come Friday, and we'll be following it all day long. In a minute, we will take a look at the Trump transition as he gets ready to enter the White House. But first, President Obama's decision to commute the sentence of Chelsea Manning.
It has been my view that given she went to trial, that due process was carried out, that she took responsibility for her crime, that the sentence that she received was very disproportionate relative to what other leakers had received. I feel very comfortable that justice has been served.
She is one of the most controversial prisoners in America, and last night, President Obama ordered that the 29-year-old Chelsea Manning be released in May, cutting short her 35-year sentence. Manning burst onto the world stage in 2010 during a deployment to Iraq. The low-level analyst, known as Bradley Manning then, provided WikiLeaks with some 700,000 military and diplomatic documents, embarrassing the United States in the eyes of the world. This is one of them. A secret video, Manning said, showed the true cost of war. You see U.S. soldiers mistaking a television camera for the enemy.
Good shoot. Thank you.
And fired on a van with 2 little children inside.
Oh, it's their fault for bringing their kids to a battle. That's right.
Manning convicted of espionage, theft, and computer fraud in 2013. The 35-year sentence was the longest ever given for a leak conviction. The day after sentencing was announced, Manning revealed that she was transgender and asked to be called Chelsea. In a male military prison for the past 7 years, she has tried to commit suicide twice.
Chelsea Manning is somebody who went through the military criminal justice process, was exposed to due process, was found guilty, was sentenced for her crimes, and she acknowledged wrongdoing.
Republicans, they're highly critical of this move. House Speaker Paul Ryan says it's outrageous. Arizona Senator John McCain calls it a grave mistake. Let me bring in our legal panel right now. Doug Von Oist, founding partner of Carson Von Oist, focusing on corporate misconduct, selected by the Legal 500 as one of the most influential trial attorneys in the country. Mayo Bartlett, an attorney at the law offices of Mayo Bartlett PLC. He's also a former chief of the Bias Crimes Unit at the Westchester County DA's office. And Mark Furnish, professor at Pace Law, has also argued before the U.S. Supreme Court. I did not see this one coming. I think a lot of people close didn't. Certainly, given the timing of some of the debates that we're having in this country regarding leaking as well, it comes at a fascinating time. But nonetheless, the argument from the White House, Mark, is that unlike Snowden, who certainly did not receive a pardon in any way, shape, or form, this person at least faced justice, and they went through the proper chains. Moreover, this person served nearly 7 years behind bars, and that there's a distinction between a difference between this person who's also admitted to wrongdoing and has apologized, and the equivalent of the Snowdens or the Assanges or the rest. Is there a distinction with a difference?
Well, I mean, it's apples and oranges. Just because Snowden doesn't get a pardon, that doesn't mean that Manning should get a pardon. I mean, this is, as you pointed out in the lead up to this, it's very, very dissonant given the timing of this, the hue and cry over WikiLeaks, and rightful hue and cry over WikiLeaks and the Russians hacking elections, stealing elections. And then at the same time, he's pardoning somebody who really launched WikiLeaks as a public entity. It's dissonant, to put it mildly, and it seems breathtakingly hypocritical. So they have to stop complaining about WikiLeaks having corrupted the election if you are going to let the person who launched WikiLeaks, at least in the public eye, off the hook. I don't understand it.
See, I disagree completely. I think that, you have all these people, Julian Assange out there, Snowden, you have Manning, you have all these whistleblowers, and it looks like, and by the way, Barack Obama has been criticized for prosecuting whistleblowers throughout his administration and his terms of office. So if he didn't do something to reach out to whistleblowers in some way and say, listen, there is a proper place for whistleblowers.
Well, maybe in the workplace, but not in the military. I mean, the military system of justice...
What else do you do, Mark?
Well, they're held to a different standard. This is the military, not the civilian justice system. Whistleblower is essentially a civil law concept that occurs in an ordinary workplace, the employment relationship, maybe somebody who's working for the government. Order and discipline is the hallmark of the military system of criminal justice. That's why this Manning was tried.
And by the way,
by court-martial.
I agree with Mark 100%. The day that we go to where we leave it to rank and file to decide which documents that could endanger lives of our servicemen, endanger missions, reveal confidential information, proprietary or otherwise, the way when we make that discretionary, who keeps it, even though they signed under oath that they would, do none of those things, I have a huge problem. But my question is, well, first off, can we be honest? If this person wasn't going through a gender reassignment surgery,
God bless you. God bless you.
Would we be having this conversation now,
I think
honestly?
you would, and people forget, again, you go back to Scooter Libby, who again outed a working CIA agent and put her life at risk, harmed this country in the process, had his sentence commuted. So also when you go back and you look at it, I don't think you limit whistleblower protection, to Doug's point, to people who work in companies. It's one thing to say, okay, Kraft Foods treated me poorly or some company treated me poorly. This goes to the fundamental safety of the American people. So you have someone who saw that we were doing things that we shouldn't have done and exposed that. Those are the types of incidents that make all Americans less safe. When you're blowing up somebody's wedding party and you're saying, oh, they shouldn't have brought their kids to the battlefield, they're not bringing them to the battlefield. They live there.
Give a journalist like Deep Throat a confidential source. Do it that way, like Watergate.
Even when it happens with Watergate, that person's persecuted, and that person becomes the problem as opposed to Richard Nixon.
You have, though, conveniently picked out two things that he did and eliminated or ignored the balance of what he did, which is including assets that the American public, the taxpayers, have out there that we're entrusting to it. But to me, the question is 6 to 7 years behind bars, is that a suitable enough punishment or deterrent to the next guy, or does this message make it okay, Doug?
Well, the bigger question, though, seems to me to be, is it the power of the president in the first place? Should any president be exercising his or her power this way? Because a court already determined what the sentence should be. Every single one of these commutations is a political move, no matter who's sitting. And somebody determined it should be 35 years. Now, maybe it shouldn't be 35 years. I tend to think that was much too much. But that probably ought to be left up to the courts to determine.
Well, the argument, though, behind the pardoning is, and we've seen it with certainly the drug-related offenses that the president has used by far the majority of, almost entirety, with a few exceptions, in terms of commuting the sentences, is when those drug laws were put in place, at the time, they thought that that was the best law and order assignment. In time, as we've seen it state to state to state, people have changed those policies. There's a different approach, and the war on drugs have taken place. That, to me, makes sense. The president is being reflective of the times. This is something different. This is a here and now.
And it's out of step with the times as propounded by the Obama administration itself. And you can't hold up WikiLeaks as a boogeyman and as a threat to national security and the very integrity of the democratic process on the one hand, and then say, hey, WikiLeaks, it's all okay.
Well, there is one, the distinction for me, though, Mark, on that one is Assange, and for that matter, Snowden, did it and ran and are hiding under the comfort of a foreigner's safety here.
I get that.
This guy, woman now, did something, and I believe it to be criminal.
Right.
He did it, he said, with open eyes, and he knew that there would be prosecution as a consequence, served a portion at least of it, was found guilty and admitted wrongdoing after the fact. I've heard no apology from Snowden or Assange. I've heard only promises from Assange.
Even if
he
two
Assange-
wrongs don't make a right.
But even if they did apologize, that apology can be hollow. Anybody who figures, oh, if I apologize, I'm going to get out, will apologize. But the bigger question, again, going back to this, is what was exposed? We're talking about the integrity of our process, but it showed that quite often, there was no integrity, that we were being lied to. In fact, Clapper went in front of Congress and lied to Congress and said that we weren't being surveilled. And these are the types of documents that allowed us to realize that Congress had been that we were being lied to. Then he went back in and said that he used the least untruthful manner in his testimony, which means clearly he knew he was lying.
Look,
Zero consequence. He's continued to sit as one of our top intelligence officers in the United States.
You can't have a private first class in the United States Army making ad hoc policy determinations about what's right
But
and what's
you certainly
wrong.
can't have
taking
your
the law into his own
intelligence
hands. He can't do that.
You can't have your intelligence directors lying to the people.
We always talk about sentencing as a deterrent for somebody doing this in the future. Is that a stiff enough sentence so the next guy won't do it? But there is no deterrent for elected officials or their people that they appoint for not exercising, not doing their job properly, withholding information. We find out about torture. We find out about these things through leaks like this.
Not only.
If
Look
it's
what
not-
happened to Petraeus. I mean, a lot of this stuff washes out and they get careers humiliated. It's a question of who does it. Right now, we have people on both sides of the aisle, blaming the Russians for meddling in our elections.
Well,
the Russians got empowered by a pattern of benign neglect over a period of years, and this furthers that pattern
Holly
of
North
just
got a great
ignoring
TV
it.
show after
Forget the
his.
Russians.
He didn't get
But
stigmatized.
think about
after that.
Snowden. He had a situation where somebody was before Congress, Mayo was saying we don't spy on the American people. He was there, he knew they were doing it, and they were affirmatively lying to the people, which was, by the way, is a violation of the people's constitutional rights.
Come home and
It never
stand
would have come
trial.
out.
Stand trial and say that's my defense, and let a jury decide if he's a hero or a traitor. Nobody's going to think this man is a
Manning
hero.
did that. Manning did that, and Manning went through that process.
And he was pardoned.
And he was pardoned.
No,
well,
he
he was commuted.
He was commuted. Look,
Right.
the
It's not
fact,
often I do this. I'm actually with Mark on this one as it relates to Chelsea Manning. All right. Coming up next, we'll pivot to politics and we'll take a look at the parade of confirmation hearings on Capitol Hill. Are any of Trump's nominees in jeopardy of getting rejected by the Senate?